All right, I'll go ahead and call the Legislative Post-Audit Committee meeting to order. If everybody will remember to get their per diem mileage reimbursement sheets turned in to me so that we can get those credited. I'd also like to take a moment to thank Whitney Dameron for providing lunch today. Whitney, can you stand up? We don't know what you look like. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, I also want to remind everybody that the meeting is live streamed, so remember to turn on and use your mics. And with that, we'll go ahead and get started. The first thing on the agenda is the BASE 1.0 grant. Kristen, would you like to go ahead and present the audit?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. So I'm going to go through what is a second limited scope audit of the Building a Stronger Economy, or BASE 1.0 grant program. So if you recall, probably just a couple of months ago, we did another limited scope audit of Soft Warfare, who is a recipient of the BASE grant funding. So this one, rather than being focused on an individual recipient, asked us to look at or evaluate Commerce's process for evaluating applications to the BASE 1.0 grant program and certain information about each application. Andy Brienzo is the auditor who did the work but couldn't be here today, so I'm presenting in his stead. So just as a kind of brief reminder to you all, if you want to turn to page 3, a couple of points about the BASE grant program. It awarded almost $100 million in federal ARPA funds to Kansas entities for infrastructure development associated with economic development projects. So the Department of Commerce administered the BASE 1.0 grant program and accepted applications for the program for about a month-long period in early 2022. So from January 31st to February 28th, 2022, they accepted applications and then made award decisions in about mid-April. So it's about a 2 to 2.5 month process, all things considered. So if you look at the bottom of page 3 and on to page 4, you'll see that during that month-long period, Commerce received 445 BASE 1.0 grant applications, requesting a total of about $1.7 billion in funding. So figure 1 shows you or illustrates the geographic distribution of those applications. So overall, there were 84 counties that had projects that requested funding. Johnson County had the most projects, and just over 70% of them had 5 or fewer applications each. And each application requested anywhere from just over $7,000 to about $25 million each. So that's the applications. Moving on to the actual awards. This is at the bottom of page 4, and then you'll see a similar figure, figure 2 on page 5. Commerce awarded about $99 million to 35 recipients of all of those applications. So again, each award ranged from anywhere from about just over $13,000 to about $10 million each. And as you'll see in the figure, those 35 projects were located in 24 counties. So 20 of those counties, or just about 80% of them, had one approved project. And the counties with the most approved projects were Johnson County, followed by Butler County, and then Shawnee and Wyandotte. So Commerce's process for reviewing BASE grant applications consisted of 3 kind of main steps. First of all, they did an eligibility review. They used a third-party vendor for this part of the process. So they looked through the application to determine whether or not the applicant was eligible to receive an award. So that includes things like whether or not they were an eligible type of business or proposing an allowable use of funds, that sort of thing. So of the 445 applications that Commerce received, the vendor determined that 195, or about 45% of them, didn't meet eligibility requirements. It was kind of the first step. The second step is then that 2 commerce staff went through and scored each of the remaining applications using a standardized scoring rubric. So they had kind of 10 different criteria that they were assessing for a total of 155 points. And then each of those individuals would score independently. They would average the 2 scores, and then that average score would become the kind of final overall score for the project. So the Department of Commerce in total scored about 250 applications, which is 56% of the applications they received. And then the final step in the process is that the Secretary of Commerce used his professional judgment to decide which applicants received a grant award and how much funding they would receive. So again, the Secretary selected 35 applications, which is about 14% of the applications that they scored. So in addition to kind of understanding and talking to the Department of Commerce about their process, we selected 10 applications to review to see if Commerce followed the process that they described. So if you look at page 6, about whatever, a quarter of the way down the page, we've got that kind of first section, which is about, again, the first step in their process, the eligibility review. So we saw for the 10 applications that we reviewed, all 10 were submitted by the deadline, and that Commerce's third-party vendor did complete an eligibility review for them. One of the 10 that we selected was not eligible, and so they did not continue in the process. Which left then 9 applications that we looked for those other 2 steps in Commerce's process. So the second of those is there at the bottom of page 6, which was Commerce's application scoring process. So this is a little different than the other step in that those 9 that we reviewed, we saw that Commerce didn't consistently follow its process. So for 8 of those 9 applications, 2 reviewers did review them, but for one of them, only a single person reviewed the application. Commerce said that that was a mistake because of the number of applications that were coming through. And then, again, because each application was supposed to be scored by 2 people, that would be, for the 9 we looked at, 18 total reviews, but one was only reviewed by 1. So that would mean there are 17 total reviews we would have been looking for. For 14 of those 17 reviews, it appeared that the review was incomplete. So if you look at the list that kind of spans the very bottom of page 6 to the top of page 7, those are the 10 criteria that the Department of Commerce was assessing. And that last criteria on the list, the expected impact of the project, was worth up to 20 points. And in 14 of 17 cases, that question was left blank. So the Department of Commerce thought that that is because the reviewer intended for the score to be a 0. We can't determine that. It's also possible that staff may have just skipped the question, which would award it essentially 0 points, even if that wasn't their intent. We also saw that the 2 reviewers often disagreed on objective application factors, so things like how many community support letters were provided, or whether there was evidence of matching funds or project-related bids and estimates. So we think that those inconsistencies are important, especially for something like if it is the case that staff skipped one of those questions, because it may have influenced the kind of total score that that application received for ones that would have been skipped. And then if you turn to page 8, that's the third and final step in their process. Again, for the 9 applications that we reviewed, we weren't able to actually assess their final award decision because the Department of Commerce doesn't document that part of the process. So staff told us that the Secretary considered application scores and then other factors, things like the geographic location of the project type, risk, and amount of funding when making final determinations, and that was a verbal process that was done in meetings with the Secretary. But without that documentation, of course, that's not something that we could review. I will point out that Appendix A, which starts on page 11, that's a full list of all of the applications to the Base 1.0 grant program. And as you may see, on page 11, page 11 and page 12, those are the projects that were selected for funding. And then there at the bottom of page 12, and then carrying on to page 13 in the remainder of the report, those are applications that were received but not awarded funding. And so in that case, there are 11, you'll see them at the top, projects that scored the same as or higher than projects that were awarded funding, but these didn't receive it. So why that's the case, what the Secretary's decision was for that determination, that's not something that we can review, again, because it's not documented. We did not make any recommendations as part of the audit, since it is the program itself is no longer active. We didn't have any. With that, that wraps up my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you all have.
Do we have any questions for Kristen? Senator Tyson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Kristen. I do have a couple of questions. So you had stated how many of the forms were left blank in those two questions?
So we expected to see 17 reviews, and 14 of the 17 didn't have that one question answered.
Which question was that again?
It's the expected impact of the project, which is worth up to 20 points of 155 total.
Okay. And were there any other questions left blank on the forms, or just that one? That seems like a critical one.
That's the only one we saw. Again, we only looked at 9.
And they were still awarded. They still received the award even though that section was blank?
I would have to go back and look at whether or not all of those were awarded funding or not.
Please double check on
Yeah.
that. And also, it says that, this is amazing to me, it said that one of the items that was inconsistent was the number of supporters. How could that be inconsistent?
I think the department's view, again, is it's the number of applications that we're moving through at that time, that it's just a mistake on their part.
Okay, and were any of the forms, the 9 that you went forward with, or the 10, that were selected by the Secretary without making it through the process, without being approved? Was that part of his 14% that he selected to move on with?
Because that part of the process wasn't documented, there's no timestamp or documentation that we can see that shows that, but we do, they were awarded funding, so those 9 that we reviewed did receive funding.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have one other, I think it would be interesting. You did an audit, and not you personally, but post-audit did an audit in 2022 over the ARPA money, and we did find some fraud and abuse going on. My question would be, would that be worth re-looking at again, or do you think this is completely separate?
That may be something you all could consider. I'm not sure that it would be directly related to that. I'm not sure what else we would do beyond kind of what we've already looked at with our review process.
Well, you could only look at a couple $1 million out of $1 billion, so maybe we could take another sampling. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Williams?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and mine are to follow up on that. Okay, so again, was this a random sample, the 10?
No. We used our judgment, so we tried to pick some from different areas of the state, different sizes, just to get some variety.
And so you are saying that the 9 that made it through, those did get awarded. And out of those 9, there were 17 reviews, and 14 of those had nothing on them.
They were reviewed. The thing that was missing was one question.
Right.
Yeah.
But out of those 9, I guess we really need to know how many out of those 9 had one item that wasn't reviewed, because to your point, that sounds like it was a 20-point item. If that's the case, and there are 9 out of 35 that missed that one, there's no way their score could have added up to 142, or even, you know, they would lose 20 points. So I'm confused on that part.
I can get you more information on this. It may be the case that in some of these instances, so there's 14 of 17 that were missing a score on that one question. Some of those would have been missing a score from both reviewers. Some of them may have been scored by one reviewer and not the other. So when they're averaged together, that will also influence how many points that application would have missed out on, if that makes sense.
It does, but it's pretty faulty evaluation that can totally skew results. Okay, but we'll leave that there for just a moment. So on the community letters of support, following up on that, and there are some that literally, are those public record? Could, for example, we see the community letters of support for those that were awarded? Because that's a pretty easy thing to say, you had 3, you had 1, you had 5. I mean, there really shouldn't be an error on that.
That might be a good question I know that Rachel is here with the Department of Commerce, so she might be able to talk about whatever the department's position is on whether or not those are open records.
Okay, and then my last question, Mr. Chair, is that federal grants usually have strict regulations on reporting and record keeping. And the third step required there was no record keeping of the third step. And so to me, wouldn't that kind of smack in all the regulatory requirements that the feds have, that you have to show your work? Because that step, there's no work shown.
Yeah, there is no, like, what we were expecting to see might be, maybe brief, but a couple of sentences that are just written and explain, you know, we selected this one, even though it has a lower score than another one, for the following reason. But you're correct, that documentation does not exist.
So your audit didn't really go into whether or not they fulfilled their federal requirements at each step. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
And just to clarify, while this was federal money from COVID, it was a stand-up state program, right? This didn't have to follow federal guidelines, did it? It was set up by the state for COVID relief money?
I believe that it still has to follow, because it's federal dollars, it still has to meet certain federal requirements, but that's correct that we did not review those federal requirements.
Senator Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Kristen. A lot of good questions here. Number one, has all the money been spent of the awarded grants? Do you know for sure out of that 99 million?
I don't know how much of that has been spent. I know it's not all of it, just because of our recent audit on soft warfare as well, they had not spent all of their grant funding, but I can't speak to any other recipients than that one.
Got it. So, you know, and I think Senator Tyson and Representative Williams made some very good points. And just to kind of distill down the point is, it seems to me that they spent a lot of time on the scoring system, but then the secretary sort of ignored it because there were some higher scores of ungranted money. So why was the scoring system more for appearance, or just to give cover for the secretary to decide whoever he wanted to give the money to? Can you tell?
I don't know. Again, staff told us that decisions were made based on things like trying to get different areas of the state some money and those sorts of decisions, so maybe a variety of different project types, and that those may be the justifications for those decisions, but again, we can't assess it because there's nothing documented.
It seems like this is a very fast process because a lot of those applications came in on the last day. So between the receipt of the final application and the actual awarding the money, how much time was spent, do you know?
It's about a month and a half, so between February 28th, and I think the award decision was like April 13th or April 15th, something like
Very
that.
quick.
So pretty
Okay.
quick.
Thank you, Kristen. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Nguyen.
Thank you. And this may be outside the realm of this audit, but the question that was lacking, or the answer, the expected impact of the project, right? Okay, so, and this was just the application process. Are there any records that would show the impact? Like closing that loop, is that for the department question perhaps?
It's, that may also be a good question for them. I think that question is, it's more subjective than some of the other ones, so it's kind of based on the staff person who's reviewing the application and their opinion and their experience. Do they think that the project that's being described would have, what's the magnitude of the impact that they think that that would have? And then they assign it a score based on their kind of professional judgment.
Okay, it seems like though, however, in the application, you could measure, you could document, you could at least make some expectations that then could be measured of its impact, but there was no.
Well, and if this is kind of what you're thinking about, some of them do provide, as part of their narrative, the applicant provides a description of what they expect the project to generate, and maybe that's in terms of jobs, or it could be capital investment, those sorts of things. But I don't know what all went into their influence of is this worth 20 points, 15 points, 10 points?
But if there was not a response provided on the front end, then it just wasn't there. And that's what you're saying. 14 out of the 17 didn't have any response to that.
That's not something that applicants filled out. That's something that Commerce staff completed based on information provided by the applicant.
That's clear. Thank you.
So,
Senator Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Kristen, so the ARPA funds were, in this particular grant was supposed to be for infrastructure?
correct.
Correct. And I'm looking through the list of various programs that were not granted. There were a number of upgrades to water treatment plants that needed to be improved. But then the plants, some of the things that were allowed were like KU Innovation Park Phase 3, 4, and 5. Industrial Road Business Park sign, Wichita Riverfront improvements. Those don't seem like critical infrastructure projects. It seems like it was just willy-nilly granting money. And, who's making is it the secretary that was making the determination about what impact these would have as opposed to need? For example, some of these water treatment plants could have some serious repairs that need to be done, but they were overlooked in favor of some growth initiative, HP's county growth initiative, that is ambiguous to me. It just seems like this was rushed and not well thought out. If it's supposed to be infrastructure, it should have been infrastructure, not some kind of, program that we can't prove that it's having an actual impact. And I don't know if that's a rhetorical question or just looking for your response on, how much time you looked through some of these other projects, what were worthy projects versus what were kind of pie in the sky.
So we didn't do that sort of assessment independently. So that might be another good question for the Department of Commerce in terms of how they may have balanced need versus impact. But I will say I do know that in terms of like the eligibility review, looking at allowable uses of funds, then the Department of Commerce in the application review process having two people who are assessing impact and the secretary having professional judgment at the end. I'm not sure how much to what degree each of them are kind of thinking about those things that you're describing similarly. But it is, I think the description of the program is infrastructure associated with economic development projects. So it does say that purposes could include things like developing or renovating business parks, parking facilities, industrial offices, in addition to those sorts of infrastructure projects I think you are thinking of.
All righty. I think that sort of explains it. Thanks, Kristen.
And we have a question online from Senator Petty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just remind me, in this grant process, I think you said early on that there was a very short window because they wanted to get the monies out as quickly as possible to the communities so that could be expended in the short window of time that was there by the federal guidelines. And then secondly, there were projects that were eliminated or applications that were eliminated because they did not meet the guidelines for the infrastructure as it was defined within the grant funding. Is that correct?
That's correct. So to your first question, the application period was about a month, and then the evaluation process was about an additional 1 to 1.5 months. And then in terms of the eligibility review of the 445 applications, 195 or 44% of them were determined not to meet the eligibility requirements.
Thank you. I think that's pretty important to know that it was a short timeline and there were ones that were eliminated. Thank you.
Representative Tarwater.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple of questions. So I've been looking at some of these that were not chosen but had higher scores. Were you able to discern whether or not they have had funding from other places from Kansas? Because just looking at it, like the first one there, K96 corridor, the industrial complex, they did receive millions of dollars during the K96, part of that K96 plan. The Hilmer Cheese Company for $25 million is an ask. I know that, you know, in appropriations bill, a couple of times over the last few years, we have given millions of dollars to them. And then like the KU Crossing Innovation Park is on there for $5 million, but it's also was awarded $5 million, the Innovation Park, under a different category. So were you able to, did you look at that maybe there were funding for any of these, not just the ones that weren't approved, but the ones that were, other funds available?
We did not. So we just looked at the base 1.0 grant funding. Again, those might be things where if those were justifications that the Secretary of Commerce made for those, that would be the kind of explanation that would be helpful if they had documented that part of the process.
Okay, and then did you find any fraud at all?
Any fraud?
Or did you look at that?
No, this is just assessing their process and whether or not they followed their process. So that is inconsistent, but we can't speak to any fraud.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Okay, any other questions for Senator Tyson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you again, Kristen. I don't know how you find the time to do everything you do, but much appreciated. So the vendor that was the third party that took a look at these, how was that vendor selected?
That would be another good question for the Department of Commerce. I'm not sure.
Thank you.
Okay, if there's no further questions for Kristen. Rachel, did you want to present on the department's response or answer any questions? Okay, if you want to come, did you have a question on the vendor selection, Senator? Okay. Senator Tyson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So thank you, Rachel. How was the vendor selected?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. I don't know for sure. I'll find out for you.
Thank you. We need to know if it was sole sourced, if it was put out for bid, and who they are, why they were chosen. All the obvious questions, who, what, when, where, why, how. Also, I would follow up, Mr. Chairman, you had a process in place, and the process basically wasn't followed. How can you get discrepancies between two people looking at these applications, the number of supporters? I mean, that seems like a very straightforward, simple question. And I just am floored that, I mean, I've worked on enough systems and put matrix together to score weighting, but they just threw the weightings out the door, and then the secretary overrides 14% of the applications. I mean, this makes no sense at all. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Williams. Oh, did you have an answer? I'm sorry.
Yeah, so I would say that, yes, there were some human errors that occurred in this process. The agency was working extremely hard to get those dollars out the door because of the pandemic and the crisis that we were all trying to overcome. I will also point out that, this grant was significantly oversubscribed, and so just working through lots of documentations and a really quick process, because we valued the speed and getting those dollars to those folks that needed it as quickly as possible.
Senator Tyson.
Thank you. Understand your comments, but you only put 2 people on it to look at all those applications? Then how much of a priority did the department really make it?
Rachel.
So at that time, we felt like 2 reviewers were adequate for those specific applications, as well as the program manager that was in charge of the entire program, as well as the outside third-party vendor that was checking that eligibility components.
Senator Tyson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I just look at the 2 graphs, and being from rural Kansas, I mean, this map is unbelievable for how many applications came in from 84 counties, and only 24 counties received grants. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Williams.
Yes, so yes, thank you for pointing that out. We meant that Wichita metro area. So when we look at that, as far as new jobs coming to the state, committed capital, that was our comparison point, yes.
Okay, and then also for the list, my question earlier was about
I can't hear the questions.
my question was. Thank you. My question was, community letter of support, are those open records? Can we look at those community letters of support for those that were awarded?
Yeah, I will just need to consult with our legal counsel on that question. I don't know for sure.
Okay, so that would be my first request, that we see those community letters of support. Particularly, I'm interested in the one that we reviewed several months ago, that its home location was not the same of where they placed their business. So I want to see how many from that city that they went to. Also, list of matching funds. Are you able to provide us the awardees' matching funds? And my reason for concern is, as I'm looking at the list that's in the audit, we see that matching funds, that was scored 20 points. And I'm looking at the one that we did a close look at, and they received 140 points out of 155. And my point on that is their entirety of matching funds were the payroll that existed before they received the matching funds. So I'm curious to know what were the other matching funds, and how did they get such a high score when they use payroll? And maybe it's not a one-off. Maybe that was consistent with the others. My next question would be, if you would provide that back to us, the list of matching funds. And number 3, it was supposed to provide immediate infusion. That was the purpose of it. And so but we found out a couple months ago that one entity that received $3 million, they hadn't even finished their work. They hadn't put the servers in, and then they received an extension. Now we're 5 years out. Is that right? 4 years out. Was it 2021? Okay, 3 years out. We're 3 years out. And I'd like to have an update of, did they actually do what they said they were? Because a lot of these, we don't even, like, there's a whole list of things that are so vague, I have no idea what they did. And so I'm assuming you come back and you do a review of how the money was spent, and you ensure that those dollars, you know, there's a performance record. So I would just like to know if Commerce is going back and checking that performance record. Thank you.
And I think staff had maybe one answer for one of your questions, Representative.
Yes, Representative Williams, I just wanted to remind you that you all did approve another limited scope audit that would have us look at the proposed way that those companies from base grant 1.0 and 2.0 that were awarded money planned to meet their match. And that is something we've started the data request on and is coming. So I'm not sure if that fully gets at your question, but it may be at least part of it.
Representative.
Thank you. Thank you for that reminder. In addition to the work that you're doing, if any of that would be available to our committee, that would also be helpful, those items, if possible.
And then, Rachel, what kind of follow-up are you guys doing on these projects? I think that was the last part of that, Representative Steele. What do you do as far as, you know, when the project's completed?
And thank you, Chairman. So we do, I believe it's quarterly reports that the applicant has to complete, and, you know, provide project updates and all the documentation needed to prove how they're spending those funds, as well as prove their matches. So we document that throughout, and then I believe there's a specific kind of threshold for site visits that are completed on various projects when they're done. So.
And so do you guys like prepare for executives, some kind of executive summary on where those projects are in the process, or I don't know, I mean, spreadsheet thing?
Yeah, so our third-party vendor helps us manage all of these reports, and then the specific program manager within the agency reports up to their, you know, kind of chain of command, and then to the secretary regarding progress on these reports and projects.
So there might be some kind of summary report available.
I don't know if there's an actual summary report, but there's absolutely reports on each of the projects and all of the documentation that's required, because again, those have to meet those federal guidelines.
Senator Petty has a question.
Rachel, do these funds that on the projects that have been awarded, do the funds go out, or do they have to expend and then they receive that money, those monies?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So they received their first disbursement, which is about, I think, a half. And then after they spend that half, and then we have all the documentation and they've met that match requirement, then they get the second disbursement. And that's typically how almost all of our grants at Commerce work. So.
And if any of these just as a follow-up, Mr. Chairman, have any of these projects that were awarded grants, have they not met those guidelines?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I don't know for sure as far as meeting specific requirements and that sort of thing. I know that our consultants and our program managers have regular communication with these folks, so I can follow up and see what that looks like.
Thank you.
Okay, Senator Tyson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And following up with some of my colleagues have asked about specific projects. And the more I look at these, the more unbelievable that some of these were selected. And I was contacted recently by a constituent. The Rails for Trails, Prairie Spirit Trail in Ottawa. Ottawa Parks received a $6 million, no, it's $5 million. They asked for $6 million. They received $5 million. And I was told that there was a recent walking bike path bridge that was put in for $3 million. Could you confirm whether, and I know you'll have to research this, whether that money was used for that walking bridge or bike bridge, however much it was, and was it $3 million? Because, wow. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Anything else? Oh, what's that?
Just one last.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Rachel. Is there a certain deadline in spending for once they receive that second portion, they met the grant? Do they have a deadline, a certain amount of time in which they have to complete the projects?
Yeah, thank you, Senator. Yes, the original grant agreements gave them 2 years, but I do know that we extended those deadlines as those projects faced, obstacles that were just unknown during that application process. So supply chain issues, labor shortages, those sorts of things that are at no fault of that particular project, but just the environment that we live in. And so extensions have been granted.
Got it. And then the third part, one final question, the third party vendor that helps administer this, so they're working with you guys throughout the entire process. Does that come out of the Department of Commerce budget to pay for that third-party vendor?
That's a good question. I'll have to check on that. My assumption is that there's probably some sort of administration or administrative dollar amount that was allocated based on this funding. I'll follow up.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right. Let's move on to our next audit today. Thank you very much, Rachel. Next audit we have is the KDHE IT monitoring. Katrin, can you kick us off?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. You should have a 5-page memo in your binder for this project. And to start out, just as a reminder, this IT monitoring report is a little bit different than our regular audits. Contrary to the audits that you hear, which are more retrospective, this is an ongoing monitoring project on a particular IT project. So our statute directs us to conduct such continuous audits to identify as early as possible when a project is at risk of failure to the scope, schedule, cost, or quality problems. In January 2024, this committee authorized us to monitor the Early Childhood Data Integration and System Enhancement Project, quite a mouthful. This will replace the outdated Child Care Licensing and Regulation Information System. 2 agencies are collaborating on this IT project, KDHE for child care licensing, as well as the Department for Children and Families for the foster care facility licensing. So this includes associated processes for facility inspections, background checks, renewals, complaints, that type of thing. In January 2024, KDHE did sign a $4.3 million contract with the vendor to create a licensing solution using a software-as-a-service model. And our monitoring results start on page 2, if you follow along in the memo. So as of April 1st, as the end of the quarter, the project scope, cost, schedule, and security was satisfactory, and I'll cover each of those briefly next. The scope has been agreed to by both state agencies as well as the contractor. At the end of this first quarter reporting period, the parties had 13 change requests following a structured change control process. Because it was structured and with good documentation, we call this satisfactory. The parties also had considered, but ultimately rejected, additional changes during our reporting period, and those may be necessary as the project continues to develop, but again, for this time period, they were rejected. And although we rated the scope as satisfactory, I do want to point out that the state's monitoring system noted it in alert status, and I'll pick up on this at the end of the presentation. As of April 1, the project also was satisfactory in cost, although the estimated cost has increased and is close to the $5 million that the state has encumbered for the project. So I'm on page 2 and spilling over into page 3 at this point. So KDHE has paid about $1.6 million of the fixed price contract for several deliverables that have either completed or partially completed. And KDHE also has approved the 5 change requests mentioned earlier, and that added another $125,000 to the cost. Additional monitoring costs for the Kansas Information Technology Office have added about $40,000 given the delays in the schedule I'll be talking about next. And lastly, KDHE did have another separate contract for annual licensing fees at a cost of roughly $385,000. As of April 1st, the project is in satisfactory status for schedule, but at least one segment is where the project is behind, which jeopardizes the go-live date. So the go-live date was already pushed back once to October 2025 with final completion of late February 2026. At the end of this monitoring quarter, several sub-tasks have slipped past their due dates, and stakeholders have also expressed concerns about a particular interface that is needed for the foster care side of things. And this component may not happen. It may need to get pushed back into the after go-live phase. 3 major tasks are scheduled to begin in the coming months. Any further schedule delays likely will jeopardize those and the go-live date. The project was satisfactory in planning for security. In this area, nothing noteworthy really changed from last quarter. I do want to briefly touch on a concern we became aware of involving the state's IT project approval and reporting system, or KARS for short. So Kansas Information Technology Office is responsible for tracking all planned and active state IT projects. And to that end, KEDO has rolled out a new system to do that, and that's the KARS system I referred to. State agencies are required to report relevant project information into that system for approval and also ongoing monitoring. KEDO charges quarterly monitoring fees for active projects with a certain risk score. Those are the fees I alluded to earlier. The KARS system was supposed to provide a more up-to-date information and to help stakeholders, including legislators, with oversight. And in comparing our monitoring on this project with what's in KARS, we noted issues with accuracy and timeliness. Specifically, KARS identified this system as in caution for scope and overall. And the last available update in mid-April was from November 2024, which actually reflected the quarter ending September 30, 2024. So quite a bit outdated. And with that, I stand for questions.
All right, do we have any questions for Katrin on the audit? All right, seeing none, thank you very much. All right, committee, our lunches are outside right now. So what the plan is, we'll probably take a 10-minute break for everybody to go outside, get their lunch, take care of anything that they need to take care of. And then when we return, we'll go into, we want to do the state fair first. We'll come back in and we'll take a executive session to look at the state fair security audit. We'll come out of executive session, then we'll go in again for the Board of Accountancy security audit. So with that, we are on recess until 12:03. All right, if everybody can start to make their way back to their seats, and we'll get started again.
Price was for the Galway hotel. It was in the email.
All right, committee. Committee, where'd Senator Tyson go? There we go. All right, committee, we're back in session. And we're going to get prepared to go into executive session. So Chris, do you have a list of who needs to be in the executive session?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. For the IT security audit of the State Fair, attendees who can stay in the room are committee members, Brian Schultz, General Manager, John Godfrey, Chief Information Security Officer, and then LPA staff, myself, Alex Gard, and Katrin Osterhaus.
All right, Senator Thompson, do you have a motion?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that the open meeting of the Legislative Post-Audit Committee be recessed for a closed executive meeting pursuant to KSA 75-4319A to discuss matters relating to the security measures that protect the information systems of the State Fair with the appropriate individuals from the Legislative Division of Post-Audit and the State Fair pursuant to the justification listed in KSA 75-4319B 12C, because discussion of such matters in an open meeting would jeopardize such security measures, that the committee resume the open meeting in room 546 south of the State House at 12:25 p.m. and to record this motion, if adopted, as part of the committee's permanent records.
So motion by Senator Thompson. Is there a second? Second by Representative Tarwater. Is there any discussion? If not, all those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. Motion carries. We're in executive session. Is Senator Peterson on? Okay. And Senator Peterson, some of this is going to be directed towards you. As a result of our last executive session, there's concern by some of the members that we seem to continue to see the same results audit after audit. They vary a little bit based upon the size of the agency. But I think it would be appropriate, and Senator Tyson and Representative Tarwater, please chime in on this, but I think it would be appropriate to have OITs come in and talk about what they're doing to address some of the vulnerabilities we see in these audits time after time, or what kind of model needs to happen. But I know, Senator Peterson, you're on the joint cyber task security thing at the in the legislature, aren't you?
I'm on JCIT.
Yeah, what do you think about, I realize this isn't part of the agenda, but what do you think about bringing in OITs and having them talk about what they're doing statewide to address some of these issues?
Beneficial.
Excuse me?
I think it would be very beneficial.
Senator Tyson, would you and Senator Tyson work with Chris maybe on what that presentation would look like? I don't know, I'm not trying to leave anybody out of this mess, but I want to kind of make sure that we have the people with the cybersecurity expertise. So if anybody feels like, as long as we're not violating a quorum, Representative Tarwater, are you a cybersecurity expert and want to be part of the conversation?
No, I was just thanking her for providing free services when she could send us a bill.
All right. So, you know, we'll look at you guys getting together to see what that presentation, you know, we've got some time in the summer here. I know we run into problems during session, having time to get our work done. But I think we need to do more than just review audits of the same thing. Katrin, I know you work in that area quite a bit also, so we want to leverage our expertise on this. All right. Is there any other discussion on this, Dusty? Yeah, Senator Petty.
So what you're talking about, Mr. Chairman, is this an expansion then of, would that be a closed session again?
I think we need to look at the security aspects of that. I'm not sure at this time whether it needs to be a closed session or not. Go ahead, Senator.
I think that's a fair statement. So, yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, once we figure out the parameters, we'll decide. You know, we don't want to bring light to any of the vulnerabilities at the state, but we also want to come up with a way where we're moving forward rather than maybe what we feel like we're doing right now. So, is there any other discussion? Senator Tyson.
I just want to thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, I want to thank all of you guys. I've learned more about cybersecurity in the last 2 years than I would ever dream that I would need to know. So, all right, with that, if there's no further discussion, we need a motion to go into executive session. Senator, Chris wants to tell us who gets to be in there. I'm sorry. Me off script and we're in trouble.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the IT security audit of the Board of Accountancy, people who can remain in the room are Mindy Speck, Executive Director, Board of Accountancy, John Godfrey, Chief Information Security Officer, and LPA staff, again, Alex, Katrin, and Chris, and committee members.
All right, Senator Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move the open meeting of the Legislative Post-Audit Committee be recessed for a closed executive meeting pursuant to KSA 75-4319A to discuss matters relating to the security measures that protect the information systems of the Board of Accountancy with the appropriate individuals from the Legislative Division of Post-Audit and the Board of Accountancy. Pursuant to the justification listed in KSA 75-4319B12C, because discussion of such matters in an open meeting would jeopardize such security measures. The committee resume the open meeting in room 546 south of the State House at 12:52 p.m. and to record this motion, if adopted, as part of the committee's permanent records.
This motion by Senator Thompson. Is there a second? Second by Senator Tyson. Is there any discussion? If not, all those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. The motion carries. We're in executive session. All right, committee, we're out of executive session. Would anybody like to take any action as a result of the executive session? If not, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda. The next item on the agenda is our continuing conversation on selecting audit proposals. I'd like to remind the committee that we have 4 that we have already selected. We have 7 approximately that we can select. Please remember, if we approve other audits later in the year, one of these 11 will have to be cut. And with that, we'll turn it over to Kristen to talk. She's going to give us a brief overview of the ones that are still out there. And then we got 2 new ones in. She's going to go into a little more depth on those 2. Kristen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and for providing the overview. So if you all want to turn to tab A, it's a similar packet to what we went through at your last meeting, where we've got a few different things that you all can follow along with. So starting with, I do this in reverse order, but if you look at attachment B in that packet, that's the schedule. So one thing I did also want to point out is we've already slated in the 4 topics that Chairman Francis mentioned you all selected at the last meeting. So one of those we've kicked off. The other 2, or 2 of the others, we're planning on kicking off very soon. And so whatever you go through today, then we'll kind of also be looking for guidance if you all have a priority, and the ones that you select, we'll kind of slate them in from there. So if you want to then switch to attachment A, that is the actual proposal summary document. So a couple things you'll note in here as you look through that's a little different than last time. You'll see I added, like on numbers 4, 5, 6, and 10 in the proposal summary, a little tag, because those are the ones that you selected at the last meeting. So you have 15 left to consider, and we're asking you to select 7 from those remaining 15. So just quick overview here. Again, starting with these the first several I'm going to talk about are all legislative requests, and I'll kind of go through these even more brief than I did last time. But 1L would have us look at the tax credit for low-income student scholarship program, and it would answer 2 questions, which is have scholarship granting organizations dispersed the program contributions according to state law, and how much in tax credits have Kansas taxpayers received and used related to the program. 2L would have us look at the KU Med School and K-State Veterinary School admissions policies and processes. And the question is about whether or not they create potential preferential treatment for certain applicants. 3L would have us review counties' reported IT security standards and resources. The question is essentially a repeat of the title. 4, 5, and 6L are all 3 ones that you all chose at your last meeting. 7L would have us review funds at the state treasurer's office, and specifically what funds they administer, how they are dispersed, and what their balances are. 8L would have us evaluate the Pregnancy Compassion Awareness Program. There would be 2 questions in that audit. Do the Kansas Pregnancy Care Network and its network providers have sufficient processes for monitoring and verifying spending? And the second one is whether or not the network and a sample of its providers follow their processes for monitoring and verifying spending in 2024. 9L would have us evaluate several of the Children's Cabinet's programs that are funded by the Children's Initiatives Fund. So there are 5 programs that are funded by the Children's Initiative Fund that we look at whether or not they achieve the performance goals in recent years. And the second question would be, has the Children's Cabinet used those 5 programs' performance to make funding or other administrative decisions? 10L is one that you all selected at your last meeting. Moving to 11L, that would have us look at the state fire marshal's inspection requirements. There are 4 questions related to that audit. The first 2 are similar, and that we would look at the fire marshal's inspections of certain types of facilities. So the first one is residential facilities. The second question would focus on childcare facilities and whether or not those align with applicable regulations. And then the third and fourth questions, again, are similar, but would have us compare Kansas's process for conducting inspections to inspections processes. And the third question would be for other states, and the fourth question would be for local jurisdictions. 12L would have us look at the TANF program, and there's 2 questions we would answer. What is DCF's process for verifying applicants' TANF cash assistance eligibility, and how many staff and hours are involved? And how much time do applicants typically spend applying for TANF cash assistance? So 13, 14, 15, 16, and 17 are all staff topics. So 13 is the first of those staff topics. It would have us evaluate KDHE's nursing facility inspection and follow-up processes. Specifically, has KDHE's completed timely nursing home inspections and appropriately followed up on identified deficiencies? 14E would have us look at the better utilizing investments to leverage development funds and whether state agencies and local governments that oversee the grant have sufficient controls over the use of those funds. 15E would have us evaluate law enforcement's processes for wiping seized personal electronics before reselling them. The question is, do law enforcement agencies have adequate policies and procedures to prevent personal electronics from being sold while still containing personal data? 16E would have us look at the Department of Corrections and specifically the inmate healthcare. There would be 2 questions, which is, does the Department of Corrections ensure its contractor provides cost-effective healthcare services to inmates? And the second question is, does the Department of Corrections ensure its contractor provides quality healthcare services to inmates? And then 17E is the last of the staff topics. This is one that would essentially have us follow up on prior audit recommendations from a few of our old audits. And then that takes us to 18L and 19L. Those are 2 new audit requests since the last time you all met. So 18L was requested by Representative Williams. It would have us review tax-exempt real property and property donated to universities. So there are 2 questions with that. The first is, what was the estimated amount of foregone property tax revenue to the state and local governments in 2024 due to property tax exemptions? And number 2 is, how much real property has been donated to the 7 Kansas public universities and is exempt from property tax? And then 19L is again another legislative request, this one from Representative Williams and also Chairman Francis and Representative Lewis. And it would it would look at the SNAP program, and we would answer 2 questions. What caused DCF's overpayment and underpayment rates for SNAP to exceed the federal government's standards in recent years? And to what degree have SNAP benefits in Kansas been misused? And then after that kind of summary, that's where you'll see all of the details about each of those proposals if you want to look at any one of them in more detail.
Senator Tyson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So how many do we select that we decide based off of? 7? Oh, I thought we were going to, okay. And then, Mr.
Oh, well, maybe I ought to maybe finish the question. I'm sorry. What were you going to ask?
No, that's fine. I did have a follow-up, but I'm going to go ahead and request, I have a question on the property tax one. So you're going to look at all of the property tax exemptions, including IRBs, county exemptions, not just what's exempted by statute and by the state constitution.
Representative Williams.
So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Can't hear if you don't use your mic.
We are using our mics, please. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I really appreciate this idea. I would like to make sure that in the audit that it's specifically broke down to as to why the exemption, whether it's by the Constitution, our state constitution, or can that be included in? I don't think that would be that difficult asking at this point.
Kristen?
Yes, I think that, again, some of this will be predicated on what data is available from the Department of Revenue, but I do know that they have that information broken out in different groupings. So I think that we can talk about what those are attributed to.
So, and I don't want to add to the audit, but IRBs, they're a property tax exemption, but there's also a sales tax component that I don't think most people know, that when they give that abatement, they're actually impacting the state coffers too. So I hope that could be included also, so that we get the big picture. I think that's what you're looking for here, and I really appreciate this.
Kristen, or Representative Williams?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, making sure this is close. I'm wondering on the IRBs, there were only 2 new ones added, and we have 7. If we have one available, the IRB in itself could be an audit. It is an important one that is vastly misunderstood, and then we could look at the property sales, the overall impact, the usage, how much has it gone up and down and over time. Conceptually, I would love to see that one be its own audit if we had room for it. And still use and still include it in the property portion.
No, that's excellent, because it is a complex system that needs to be looked at. So, Mr. Chairman, I was going to make a motion for the property tax audit.
Just one thing. Did we just recently do an IRB one? Was that something I remembered in conversations that I had?
So we did do an evaluation of the industrial revenue bond property tax exemption, the IRBX program.
And what year was that?
It is in the last few years, and I'm looking to see if maybe Chris.
Sometimes
a year.
a few years is like 12 and we lose track of time.
Well, I think it's more like 3 or 4, the last 3 or 4 years.
Time flies when you're having fun.
Mr. Chair, but I don't think that IRB audit, as I recall, dove into the amount of money we're talking. I think it was more about the efficiency of the IRB or the impact, as I recall. Yes.
And can you address this deal? Did it involve the amount of money, or was it just the efficiency?
As Kristen mentioned, we focused on the property tax component. During a 15-year period, it reduced statewide property tax revenues by roughly $100 million each year. That's all I have off the top of my head.
All right. I'm not trying to shut anything off. I just want to make sure everybody knows what's out there and been recently done. Senator Tyson, did you have a motion?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And that didn't deal with the sales tax portion, though.
Right.
Yes. So I would make a motion on 18L that we accept that for an audit. And if somebody wants to make a substitute to include the other one, that's fine. Okay.
Go ahead and talk in the mic.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, so I think in the IRB portion, at least as relevant to property tax, it looks like it would be able to be itemized, if you will. So we would see that in there. You don't think you would need a substitute? I do think that the IRB discussion we've had would be an excellent additional one, and I think we could do a separate motion, is the way I'm thinking about it.
I'll make the first motion, then on 18L, if anybody else wants to make the next motion, that would be great.
So can you restate your motion again, please?
Mr. Chairman, I move that 18L be approved for an audit.
Is there a second? Second is by Senator Thompson. And then go ahead, Representative Tarwater.
Thank you. I was just wondering, was the intent to include properties that are also purchased and removed from property tax?
Yes, anything that is, yeah, that we have lost. Really, the goal is to see, out of all of our property in Kansas, how's that changing? What's left? How much is that base shrinking?
Thank you.
And Senator Petty, did Senator Petty have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of things. One, as the discussion goes on to other ones, when someone starts talking about, if they could refer to the number that they're referencing. And then my follow-up is on the 18L. So I know it sounded like there was expanded talk about all properties, but this does still deal specifically with universities. Is that still correct?
No, it's not correct. And Kristen, can you address that?
Yes, so the first question would be more global and looking at all property tax that's exempt. And then the second question, to your point, Senator Petty, would be focused on the universities only. And their foundations, correct?
So, Mr. Chairman, can I follow it?
Sure.
Okay, so on the addition then of I believe the IRBs, was that correct?
Kristen.
So the IRB property tax exemption would already be included in question 1. So I don't think the motion right now needs to clarify anything on that. I think the discussion, if I'm understanding correctly, would be after this discussion and voting, there may be a separate motion to conceptually approve of an audit that would look at the IRB program.
Senator Petty, do you have anything else?
Yeah, so there's nothing, so this, you're saying IRBs are already included in question number 1. That's correct?
Yes.
The property tax specifically.
Right, property tax.
Thank you.
Senator Tyson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the clarification. I'm not sure about conservation easements, if those become a property tax exemption or not, but I want to make sure any program is included in such exemptions, like we're going after KU, not going after, but that we're looking at what is being taken off the tax rolls and why this burden keeps getting higher and higher on our residentials and others. So I just want to make sure any property tax exemption is covered. Thank you.
Representative Williams.
Yes, thank you for letting me address that, because I mean, it's also state parks. It's purchasing and growth on any level. Whenever our government grows, it's taking properties that were on the tax rolls and now will not be.
Senator Tyson.
Thank you. I've been told 2 different things, so I don't know the fact, but Topeka owns a hotel. The city council owns a hotel. So are they being exempted, or will they be exempted from property taxes? I mean, that's the type of stuff that we would like to see in this audit. I know it's a very aggressive audit. It may be a little may take a little more time than estimated, just because of, there's a lot out there.
Any other comments? All right. Seeing none, the motion is to approve 18L. All those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. Motion carries. All right. Representative Williams?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I'll follow up with the IRB. And I think since this one is more conceptual, we definitely want to provide staff latitude and ask Senator Tyson to work with staff. But from what I understand, this would focus, it'd be a follow-up to the IRB one that we did previously. And so it would look at the total impact of IRBs, the growth of IRBs, the trajectory, how it moves through time, and all IRB subsidies, whether they are sales or property tax. And then I would leave the remainder elements to the senator.
Representative Tar, that's a motion, correct? Is there a second for the motion? Second by Representative Tarwater. Is there any discussion? Representative Tarwater.
Thank you. So one of the problems with the audit that was done in 2022 was that the data that was reported from the local authorities was hugely inaccurate. And so one of the things I'd like to look into is why they're not reporting accurately, and what do we need to do to get them to report accurately? Because if we passed a law this year for transparency for that stuff, and if they're not reporting it accurately, the transparency doesn't matter. Thanks.
Other discussion on the motion? Representative Tyson.
Thank you, Mr. No, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know we probably it'd be too much scope creep on the audit, but I would like to know what foreign companies have also been offered IRBs, if that is possible. I don't want too much scope creep, but I know that that would be interesting, as it is an issue.
Representative Thompson, or Senator Thompson.
That's okay. And are we talking about the same 3 staff, 4 months? This is more for Chris, or we don't know yet? Okay, so.
We may be down to one more audit.
Well, and that's okay. That's what I'm wondering, do we, these 2 are going to be big, but I think they're very important. And would we vote on this as 20L or just conceptual amendment or conceptual?
Chris?
Rules allow the committee to vote and approve an audit in concept, and then I would work with Senator Tyson and others, come up with a proposal, which will then be circulated for your review and feedback, that sort of thing.
Okay.
Any other discussion on the conceptual audit? Chris? Senator Petty?
So I'm just trying to understand. So we have a list here of 19. We've just dealt with 18L, but we're adding a new one without even conversation about any of the others that have already been submitted.
That would be correct.
Doesn't that kind of violate the thought of legislators submitting requests, and yet we as a committee are jumping over even getting a discussion about them?
It's allowed by the committee rules.
Thank you.
Any other discussion? Senator Holscher.
Oh, thank you. Actually, my question was kind of along the same lines. I thought that we allowed additional time for audits to be submitted to be considered for this meeting versus conceptual. So like I said, my concern is along those same lines, that we have others that have already been submitted that haven't been discussed. Thank you.
Any other discussion on the motion? If not, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, no.
No.
Motion carries. We're back on the other ones. Just real quick, I have one that I think we ought to consider. I think 17E, reviewing agencies' implementation of selected performance audit recommendations, is important for us to see what audit recommendations we've made, whether they've been complied with. And if not, I mean, if they're not complied, why? So I would like to make a motion for 17E. Senator Tyson. Okay, go ahead.
So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I second your motion, and I do have a question on this one when I was reading through it, because we discussed it a little bit at the last meeting. And I just wanted to make sure that staff kind of has an idea of what they're looking at here. And I just want to make sure we're on the same page with them. So if you,
Chris, can you address that? Or Kristen?
Did you want to know which audits? What you were looking at. Yeah, it's, they're listed there. Let me find it real quick.
I have it.
Go ahead.
If it's okay. Those would be evaluating, so we had some recommendations on evaluating groundwater management districts. This would be related to part 2 of the election security audit that we did back in July 2023. So several recommendations to the Secretary of State's office. It would also include a follow-up on the Rural Opportunity Zones program and some recommendations to the Department of Commerce and Revenue. And then also recommendations to the Department of Revenue for our audit of motor vehicle sales tax.
Senator Tyson.
so thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had concern over a couple of programs. They had pretty egregious results from their audits. And one of them, the House took action and tried to address it. The Senate somewhat dropped the ball. And don't want to point fingers, but so I would like to include that in the audit if we could also. It's the housing income. It's not low, but I keep calling it low. The housing tax credit. And it was a new program that was started a few years ago, and it's very aggressive, more aggressive. And I keep reminding people this went through Fed and state. It did not go through tax, and there's a reason we're back here looking at it again. So I would like them to follow up on that audit and the information on it if they could. And also they had done an audit on HPIP, and it was in the 2022 or 2023 audit. You had looked at HPIP from 2018 to 2020. You had found that over $3 billion had given out. And I know we're doing that small audit, but it kind of lines up with that too, to see if anything had followed up on it. So.
Can you guys add that in this existing scope?
I think the problem is we don't have recommendations related to those things, which is the focus of, so this audit work would have us say, you all reported over the last, we follow up every 6 months. You reported you did these things to implement our recommendation. Do we see evidence and documentation that you've actually done those things? So in both of those instances, Senator Tyson, we don't actually have recommendations to the agencies regarding those.
Okay. You didn't give a recommendation on the low-income housing tax credit, even though you said financially it could. I think that's a pretty big recommendation, but okay. Okay, Mr. Chairman, I'll just leave this to the 100-hour audit that I requested, and hopefully it'll cover it. But I would think it also demonstrates that we need recommendations in our audits too. So thank you.
Is there any other discussion on the motion? And you're still good with the second? Okay. Representative Tarwater? Chris? Oh, Senator Petty?
The discussion that just preceded answered my question. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Representative Tarwater?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to go back to what Senator Tyson was just talking about on the low-income housing tax credit. I would like them to revisit that just to get the figures, because we keep getting different figures. We're spending $250 million a year is what we thought according to the audit, but last year we spent $330 million, and this year we capped it at $25 million, then to 8, then to 8, or 250 million, then 88 and 88, then we're going to sunset the program. But I would like to get real numbers because there's no limit on this thing, and we are spending hundreds of millions of dollars each year.
Kristen?
So we haven't gotten there yet, but one of the items on today's agenda on the consent calendar is approval of a limited scope audit, and it would get at numbers for the affordable housing tax credit and HPIP.
Any other discussion? If not, all those in favor of approving 17E signify by saying aye. All those opposed, no. Motion carries. All right. Representative Nguyen.
I'd like to revisit 1L, so I guess I'll make the motion that we add 1L to our list of audits. Tax credits for low-income student scholarship program.
There's a motion to approve 1L. Is there a second? Second is by Representative Sawyer. Is there any discussion? Representative Nguyen.
Well, I'll just say we keep expanding it, so that seems to be a legitimate reason to look at it.
Okay. Any other discussion? Let's talk in the mic. Senator Representative Tarwater.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When's the last time that we looked at this? I can recall an audit about 3 or 4 years ago on this that turned out pretty good.
We did do a limited scope audit. Again, I'll see if I can get cues from Chris on exact year from 2022. And it is also part of the follow-up audit that like the one you all just discussed, we are doing that one for recommendations from 2022 audits. And so we will have that to present as well. But it's just focused on our recommendation, which was related to the 90% distribution requirement in state law.
So let me ask you a question. It's not the one in the packet. It's one that's coming up.
Correct. It's one you all would have chosen last spring that we are just now getting the work done on. But it is specific to the recommendation. It would not have updates on if you're looking for updated numbers and that sort of information. That is not going to be part of the follow-up audit. That would have to be part of 1L.
Okay. Representative Tarwater.
So, I mean, in light of the fact that we've got to be cognizant of time, I would say that we don't really need to do this because we had one in 2022. We're revisiting it this year. And if you're looking for updated numbers, research can certainly provide that without having to have an audit. That information is public. So I would say we could choose a different audit.
Representative Nguyen.
Thank you, and I would consider that, but if we could then add the numbers to the ones that we're going to have, then it seems like a legitimate compromise, instead of just saying, no, we don't need it.
Could someone make a request from research to get those numbers?
To be in the audit that we get.
Chris?
We can certainly reach out to legislative research and see what they have readily available. It will not be part of our audit. It would just be a separate information. At the last meeting, the committee requested that we present that tax credit scholarship program audit from 2022 when we present the follow-up work. And then we'll have updated info from research.
All right, I got confused on that last little bit. I kind of vaguely remember it, but say that again.
We are currently doing work following up on recommendations from that audit. That will be released this summer. When we release those recommendations, at the last meeting, you all requested, let's refresh the whole audit presentation. Remind us what it was about and your recommendations, then we'll have the follow-up work. If you would like, we can reach out to research and see if they have things readily available for that meeting as well.
Representative Nguyen.
So if that would satisfy essentially the components of this, then I would withdraw the motion. And that has to be a judgment call from you.
All right. So is the motion withdrawn?
Correct.
Okay. All right. All right. Next motion, Senator Tyson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've been anxious on this one. 2L, to audit the KU medical student selection process and the K-State veterinary process, how those are selected. We have a problem with a shortage on large animal vets in Kansas, and we are feeling it greatly. And I know that they are given priority to out-of-state students. So, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We have a motion from Senator Tyson. Is there a second? Second by Senator Thompson. Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, seeing none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. Motion carries. Okay, where are we at? Senator Thompson.
Thank you. I'd like to suggest 11L. I know we're in the process of discussing that as the meeting closed last time, and that has regard to the state fire marshal. I know that it's impacting some small businesses, child care facilities, and wanted to take a look at that, how it is impacting, because in some cases I think they're overzealous in their requirements. It's impacting the cost of some of the child care facilities and things of that nature. I'd move that we look at 11L.
All right, we have a motion for 11L. Do we have a second? Second by Representative Tarwater. Is there any discussion? Representative Tarwater.
Okay, so, yeah, so I put this kind of on pause last time to discuss with the fire marshal because in the commerce, from the commerce side of things, commerce chair, I talk to him quite frequently, and he is very pro-business. He understands that sometimes it's overburdensome, some of the regulations. So I would like to make sure that part of this is what's in statute, because there's been recent fire codes that seem to have changed for duplexes and triplexes that have to have fire extinguishers now. And in today's cost of living, you know, we're always trying to reduce the cost of housing. When you require absolute fire sprinklers in a triplex now versus just the parapets and the fire barriers between the two or three, you increase the cost of construction quite a bit. And talking to him about these kind of new things that are coming down, it seems that there are statutes that are in place that haven't been followed that now are being followed. And so I'd like to identify in this audit what statutes need to be changed to make this easier to build houses. And I think we've addressed most of the child care facility thing in the child care bill that we passed, but there's no reason we can't take a look at that just to make sure.
Senator Thompson, you need to respond to that. Okay, Senator Tyson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So part of the problem here is rules and regulations. It's not just statute. And maybe that's what you were going to visit. And I've been, this has been an issue for years. What will happen is the state accepts the federal standard fire marshal regulations. And so it gets pushed down on us without people even realizing. So maybe that should be part of the audit, whether they're looking at, whether it's through rules and regs or statute. But I know it's a major problem. We fought it off in 2000, well, years ago, and it came back a couple years ago, and we weren't able to shut it down. So I think they accepted rules and regulations that most legislators aren't even aware.
Representative Sawyer.
Yeah, as I recall, when we at the last meeting, we kind of broke up. This audit says it takes 4 auditors in 6 months, and I think we were looking at maybe doing less objectives or something to get the time down, as I recall.
I think we were talking about that, and I can't remember. Yeah, I can't remember that discussion, but I think you're right, yeah.
Representative Tarwater.
I just think when you get into the audit, I think you're going to discover that it probably won't take that long because of some of these items that have been concerns in the past have been addressed. Like, for example, the drop-off programs for childcare are now being ruled and regulated like a school would, and that was a big problem because after 3 o'clock, the building had to be built completely differently for the same students. But that has been changed in that law, and we work with the fire marshal on that. So I think, even though it says 4 times 6, I think once they get into it, they'll realize that they may not need that much time. Is that a possibility, or do you have to go by what this says?
Kristen?
We don't have to, this is just an estimate, so, I mean, if it makes sense and there's a way to kind of be more efficient about that, of course, we would look for those opportunities. I will also clarify that I think the discussion from your all's last meeting, you were talking about Objective 3, which would have us compare Kansas to other states. And I think what we were discussing is if you were to eliminate that objective and take it down to the other 3, it would, we estimate, save a month.
Anybody want to talk on that one? Everybody's just shaking their head. Representative Tarwater.
Is that something else that we could maybe ask from research? I mean, research could give us what other states' fire codes are and fire regulations are, I would think, and not tie up the auditors.
And Chris, if you need me to make some of these requests to research, I don't know how it works for you guys working with them, yeah. Maybe, I know you guys, if you don't do it, you can't put it in your report, but if you could hand it out at the same time to us, and then we do it to kind of try to make sure we have the information we need. Senator Petty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I think it makes sense to consider not having 3 since we've just have changed that legislation as Representative Tarwater referred to. And so as within this audit, will you then be referring at all to the new legislation or just looking at several years prior to?
Kristen?
I don't know that I have the answer to that question right now. I think it would, so part of these, or many of the questions that are written here would have us look at what processes were in place. So I think that we would be looking backwards, but my understanding is we've also kind of discussed what would be a new question in here that might focus more on the statutory changes specifically. And so that, I think we'll just have to spend some time kind of thinking about how to scope that out and if more recent legislation would make sense.
Senator Petty.
Well, it seems that as Representative Tarwater mentioned, the Office of Early Childhood and what has come about with that legislation passing does have a impact on the fire marshal. Also the fact that we have a new fire marshal. So I think it seems like the most important question is within the state, more than looking outside of the state.
All right. Any other discussion? All right. Seeing none. All those in favor of approving 11L signify by saying aye. All those opposed, no. Motion carries. One of the ones that I would like to make a motion to approve is 19L, reviewing the Supplemental Nutrition Assistant Program payment error rates and benefit card transactions. We recently in the House had a hearing by our new oversight committee chaired by Representative Williams. And it seemed like we had some error rate issues. And this would be an attempt to find out what has caused those issues over the past. There's a second by Senator Thompson. Is there any discussion? Excuse me? Yeah. I let the senator second my motions, Representative. Okay. All of the, all
Mr.
those in
Chair.
favor of the, yes,
Mr.
Senator
Chair.
Hulsher, yes.
Well, I'm just kind of curious what the differences are, and I've read over both the differences between that request and then there's another one on that topic. I'm scrolling back through here, 12L. Because if we're talking about processing, I'm wondering if these two essentially go together, or maybe maybe Chris or Kristen can help illustrate the difference there.
Well, and I think one of the primary differences is one regards SNAP and the other one TANF. But Christian, could you address that?
You are correct. So 12L is focused on the TANF program and more like information about the process and how the process works. And 19L is focused on SNAP. And then specifically, there's been, I think for a number of years, but a letter issued by the federal government about overpayment and underpayment rates for SNAP in Kansas being concerning. And so this would be focused on that, as well as the actual transactions and whether or not those are appropriate.
Senator Hulsher, did that clear it up?
Yeah, no, and I see the difference obviously between the two programs, but we are talking about DCF processing. So I guess my question was, wouldn't we want to look at some of those elements in terms of 12L as far as what the process is for verification and how much time is spent?
Representative Sawyer?
Since they both involve DCF, if we did both of these, would it save some time in auditing? I mean, since there'd be kind of overlap, it could do those two kind of together. I don't know if there's. Oh, I know, but I make a separate motion, but I'm just saying it might make sense to do them together if they can kind of work together. That's my question is.
Kristen? Or Chris?
I think that any efficiencies would be very limited just because they are, and I don't know this yet, and we would have to learn it when we got into it, but even though it's the same agency, I'm assuming because they're different programs, the processes won't be the same, which to me, auditing standards, we get way into the details and means maybe a little bit of time savings, but probably not a lot.
Senator Thompson?
Yeah, I just kind of supporting Kristen's statement. Kind of the view of 19L is different. It's more looking at overpayment, underpayment rates, and misuse in the benefits, whereas the TANF is more of a eligibility and application time. So it's kind of two different audits. So I don't think we could put them together.
And just to add on to some of the seriousness, and help me with this, Chairman Williams, but one of the other things is because there's a couple of years of issues on this thing, we're subject to some, is it fines? Chairman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We haven't actually received any fines, but if you have two letters in a row that show that you've got some overpayments or underpayments, then yes, you can be subject to penalties, which we haven't yet, but we have gotten letters consistently. I would just say that if the committee wants to approve this one and then the next audit, the other one, they actually do go hand in hand and would be helpful.
All right, so let's look at it in that manner. Is there any other discussion on this one? All right. All those in favor of approving 19L signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. The motion carries. And now is there, where are we at?
We're six.
Six.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion. Yes.
Okay, Senator Tyson.
One more. I would like to make a motion on 12L. I was planning on doing this before all of the discussion. However, I do want to tweak the scope of it somewhat because it is more focused on process, and I would like to bring in the fraud and the overpayment, underpayment options that were looked at on SNAP. And also, there was a state law that was passed a few years ago on all of these programs that the department's supposed to be doing an electronic check to make sure that they're citizens. And I would like to add that to part of the scope also, especially on the TANF. And I know we've seen reports in the past on the TANF money being used at Colorado Rockies games, on cruise ships. I would like that included as part of the report too, if we may, Mr. Chairman. So I move that we do 12L with some,
Expanded scope.
yes.
Are you guys understand what the expanded scopes are?
With your all's permission, I think we would follow similar to the process Chris was describing for the conceptual audit that you all discussed. If you would give us the liberty to kind of draft something up and then work with you all to pull that together and get your review.
Okay. Is there a second on the motion? Second by Senator Thompson. You get to do a lot of seconds.
That's okay.
All right. Is there any discussion on the motion? Senator Petty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm just curious then, would that change with the expanded scope? Because currently it's dealing with the process for verifying applicants and the amount of time that takes and for how much time it takes an applicant to actually be able to apply for TANF. And now the scope is also going to include include misuse of TANF dollars or cash assistance. Is that correct?
Senator Tyson.
Thank you. Yes, and also citizenship, other statutes being followed on that. Yes.
Senator Petty.
So with those two additions, you currently have down 3 staff, 3 months. Will that change that time at all?
They're all head nodding yes.
That's what I thought. Okay, so we're going to approve this and then staff is going to bring back what they think it's going to, amount of time it's going to take.
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay. Senator Holscher.
Yeah, I was just going to mention, I think it would be interesting to have that additional scope because we've had the Inspector General indicate that he has been looking at those areas and has put some numbers out there that haven't been necessarily audited themselves. So I guess it would give us kind of a baseline to compare against certain statements that have been made in regard to potential fraud with these programs where we haven't seen a lot of actual data to back it up.
Is there any other discussion? Not. All those in favor of the motion signify by, oh, Senator Tyson.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman. I
That's
just
fine.
want to make clear, if I missed anything, it's pulling over ideas that were in the previous, the 19L that we passed. So I just want to make sure in case I missed anything when she was asking the question on how far the scope was, that we increased it. So,
Okay.
thank you.
And we'll have an audit request to look at our next meeting. Okay. Any other discussion? If not, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. The motion carries. And our audit schedule is full up, is that correct? All right. Okay, so we'll move on to the consent calendar. Kristen, can you go over the consent calendar items with us?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. So on today's consent calendar, you've got several different items. So if you want to flip to tab B, that's where we're at in your committee notebooks. The first item on the consent calendar is approval of the minutes from the last 2 meetings. So that's March 24th and April 10th, and you can find those in attachments A and B. A second item on the consent calendar is accepting a performance audit, a limited scope audit. Sorry, I'm jumping out of order here. The second item is accepting the performance audits that were presented today. So that would include the audit that I presented of the base 1.0 grant program, and then the two information security audits, one on the Kansas State Fair and the other on the Board of Accountancy. And then the third item on today's consent calendar is approval of a limited scope audit that Chairman Francis has preliminarily approved. You can find that as attachment C in the packet here. And I'm happy to walk through this if that's of use to the committee. It does build on the conversation that you all were having about the Kansas Affordable Housing Tax Credit and the HPIP programs. And it's just a reminder to you all that anyone who has an objection to a limited scope audit can object to that in the form of a motion and have it removed from the list and voted on separately. Otherwise, without objection, it would be approved along with those other items today.
All right, does anybody have any questions for Kristen on the consent agenda or the consent items? Representative Petty? Senator Petty?
My office just changed. So I can't, wait a minute, it finally did pop up. Thank you. I was going to say, I can't see attachment C for what your, the request was on that limit, but so it's the review the tax credits awarded and used to the High Performance Incentives Program and Kansas Affordable House Tax Credit. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. I'm sorry. It wasn't coming up on my screen. Thank you.
Any other discussion on the consent calendar? Okay, so first thing, would any of the members like to abstain on the approval of the minutes because they were not present? Okay, seeing none. Also, at this time, if there is a motion to object to any of the consent calendar items, we can go out and approve them individually. Is there any objections? Okay. If not, all those in favor of the consent calendar say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Motion carries. Next thing we need to do is talk about a next meeting date. And I kind of had one idea in my head, but we've got a couple of conceptual items. And does that change the way that I would like to proceed on the next meeting? One of the things I would like to do is we've got some choices of meeting a lot or having longer meetings on one day and try to get as much work done on one day as possible. My preference, because of how far away I am, is to try to get as much work as we can on one day and save travel and expenses and people needing to get off work from their day jobs. I don't know how you guys feel about that. With that being said, what's kind of a date that works for us next, Chris, that we can make a big day out of it?
Committee members, if you turn to tab C, there's a listing of work that is currently underway and approximate dates, very rough dates they would come due. So the top item is today's, those are the audits we went through today. The next batch, we'll have a batch of audits coming out in May, throughout May and June, another batch in July and August. It goes on from there, plus the ones that you approved today will go on from there. So I don't have a date in mind, Mr. Chair. Depends on which of those audits most that you would like covered in the next meeting, that sort of thing.
How many of these audits do you think we can do in a day? Let's say we start at, what's the earliest that everybody wants to kind of start? I know some people have to drive in from Kansas City and some people from Wichita. I think Representative Williams has a 2-hour drive in. Is 10 about the earliest anybody wants to meet? Could do 9. Do you think that works with Representative Williams? So let's say we did 9 to 3, something like that. We'll probably all be real happy with each other by 3 o'clock. Can we meet, so I believe ALEC is July 16th to 18th or something like that. And I believe NCSL is like August 3rd to the 6th. Could we work something out? I mean, does anybody have a problem if we work something out in that kind of gap there between?
Mr.
July?
Chairman,
Yeah.
CSG is July 27th to the 30th, and I am going to CSG Midwest.
So maybe, does anybody know that ALEC date? I don't. I saw it. Would there be anything we could, is meet in July in that gap there between something like the 19th and the, what'd you say that date was, Senator Petty, that CSG started?
It's the CSG is the 27th through the 30th of
And you'll
July.
need travel on the 26th, won't you? Because it's
Correct.
in Canada or someplace, I think.
It is Saskatoon.
What's everybody think about trying to set up a date between July 19th and July 26th, tentatively? Do we need to have one earlier than that, before the July 16th?
No, it's really your call, committee members. We'll have audits available, but they'll just wait for the presentation whenever the meeting is.
Yeah, something like the 21st or the 22nd. I don't know how. Yeah. The 22nd. So would it work out better for you guys to do the 21st or the 23rd? 21st, that's a Monday.
21st?
Okay, let me look at my
It's a
schedule.
Monday.
Now that I got everybody set up, July 21st. Okay, let's tentatively set for July 21st, start at 9 o'clock. Get as much work as we can done. Maybe we can have something on that OITS also to talk about that situation, if we can have that figured out by then.
And then going by this list, theoretically, the audits ready would be transient guest tax, abuse and neglect registries, the follow-up audit that you approved last year that Kristen mentioned, Medicaid IG, limited scope, another IT security audit, possibly free lunch. So there'll be a lot of business.
And Mr. Chairman, you're looking at 9 through 3?
Yeah, something like 9 to 3. Is there something we need to adjust a little bit?
No, sounds good.
Okay. All right. Is there any other business for the committee? If not, thank you, everybody, for your work and your patience.